Heart of Tin, Chapter 3. The next morning I met the Scarecrow and the Lion for breakfast in the Lion's chambers. Like my own rooms, they were lushly appointed, but where my bed was, a giant four-poster, the Lion's was something like an enormous dog bed. Special attention had been given to the walls, which were painted with shimmering murals of antelope fleeing in terror for some unknown foe, presumably the lion. Even the magic of the palace couldn't cover up the lion's distinctive perfume, and the servants had yet to clear away a pile of gnawed bones in one corner. The lion was the only one of us who actually ate. He was working away at an enormous raw steak when we arrived. Being the king of beasts only activates the appetite, he mumbled through a mouthful of meat. The Scarecrow and I exchanged a glance. I was fond of the lion, but I couldn't help wishing becoming royalty had improved his table manners. Dorothy was nowhere to be seen. Probably she had already been witness to one of the lion's breakfasts and had wisely decided to pass on the second opportunity. I tried not to let my frantic anticipation show. Where was she? Why, for summoning me all the way to the palace, was she being so elusive? Was she just shy? Could it be that she was wondering if I cared about her in the same way she cared about me? My mind was a whirl, and I made polite conversation with the lion and the Scarecrow. We caught up on our respective comings and goings since Dorothy left Oz. The lion was enjoying his new role as the king of beasts, although he confessed to periodically snacking on one of his subjects. Not the best for morale, he admitted, but it does wonders for discipline. After his brief stint as ruler of Oz, the Scarecrow had retired to a corncob mansion in the country. I wondered if he had any bad feelings toward Ozma. After all, the wizard had appointed him the ruler of Oz, not that upstart fairy, but he was vague about what he's been doing at that time. Of course, it was such a wonderful surprise when Dorothy turned up on my doorstep with that funny odd pair, Em and Henry, he said. After he talked for quite some time about the technical difficulties of corncob architecture, I must admit I wasn't quite following his monologue, but I snapped to attention at that. You mean the ball? I said. Oh no, the Scarecrow said serenely. She came to my mansion, of course. Practically the moment she got back to Oz. Threw a little party for her. The Munchkins were over the moon. Don't think Em and Henry enjoyed it much, though. They kept talking about how much they missed their cows. Some sort of talking pet in the other place, I gather. They said they had quite a few of them. Why did Dorothy come to you? I said, openly hurt, and the Scarecrow raised a painted eyebrow in surprise. I smiled quickly to cover my slip. How I felt about Dorothy wasn't anyone else's business. Not until I knew she felt the same way about me. Well, I suppose I was on the way to the Emerald City, the Scarecrow mused. He seemed thoughtful, and he kept looking at me with his beady little button eyes. Quite something, that business with the aunt and uncle, the lion was saying through another mouthful. Didn't see that one coming. Does Dorothy seem different to you? Different how? I asked quickly. What business? Just after you left last night, the lion said, Dorothy got into a terrible fight with her aunt and uncle in front of the whole ball. And Ozma lost her temper too, and shouted at Dorothy. Sent her right to her room like a little kid. Can you imagine? Everyone's been talking about it all day, and no one knows where Dorothy and Ozma are now. No one's seen Dorothy? I asked. Not since she left the ball, the Scarecrow confirmed. Though most likely she's just hiding in embarrassment. Poor thing, he chuckled. Don't you dare talk about her that way, I snapped. She's our savior. She'd do anything for us. The lion and the Scarecrow were staring at me in surprise. Goodness, Tin, no need to get worked up, the Scarecrow said mildly. I didn't mean any disrespect. I'm sure Dorothy has her reasons for not seeing anyone today. I scowled, but let it go. Suddenly the lion sniffed the air. I smell glitter, he said. I sat up straight. A moment later I heard the fast tap-tap of a pair of high heels, and heard a familiar high-pitched giggle. Someone rapped on the door to the lion's room, and before any of us could answer, it swung open. It was Dorothy, looking more radiant than ever. The air around her crackled and sparkled with the strange haze. She was still wearing her dress from the ball, although it looked a little the worse for wear, and was torn at the hem. What had happened? I wondered. Was she hurt? She didn't seem to be. She seemed, in fact, downright triumphant. Her shoes blazed with red light, and made the lion cover his eyes with one paw. Even the Scarecrow shielded his black button eyes, and behind her, hovering a few inches off the ground, was none other than the good witch Glinda herself, looking like a cat who'd just been let loose at an unsupervised aviary. All three of us were so surprised we were speechless. "My dear friends," Dorothy said, her voice a satisfied purr, and her gaze sweeping the room, and pausing for just a second on the lion's gruesome leftovers. "Do I have news for you? Welcome to the new, improved Oz. I'm running the show now, and everything is going to be so much better." We stared at her for a moment, in stunned silence as Glinda floated behind her, beaming in a way that didn't quite reach her cold eyes. The Scarecrow was the first to break the silence. "Dorothy!" he exclaimed. "We didn't know what happened to you after the ball. You vanished with Ozma and—" He paused, looking confused, as if it was possible to look when your face is painted on. "Where is Ozma? And what's she doing here?" By she, he obviously meant Glinda, who looked none too pleased to be referred to in a disrespectful tone. "Oh, Ozma," Dorothy giggled, sweeping into the lion's room with Glinda at her heels. Dorothy looked around for somewhere suitable to sit, her lip curling a little at the sight of the lion's nest. Poor Dorothy! She would be accustomed to more gentile surroundings. Why hadn't we thought to clean the room for her? "My beloved friends, I have so much to tell you," she wished fervently, and I could speak to her alone. I was burning with the need to tell her how I felt, to see her answer. I closed my eyes, imagining how it was just the two of us. I'd brush her beautiful hair back as she tilted her perfect face up to kiss me. "Princess Dorothy," Glinda cut in smoothly, "perhaps we should retire to a more appropriate chamber for discussion." "Princess Dorothy?" My eyes snapped open. I was as puzzled as the lion looked. But I wasn't going to show it. Dorothy was certainly a princess in my heart, and as far as I knew, she had no literal royal blood. She was from the other place. How could she? Had one of the fairies somehow made it to Kansas? "You're right," Dorothy replied. "Everyone, follow me. The throne room will have to be redone. Ozma has terrible taste. Bless her heart. But I think we can find a suitable room, don't you?" "If Her Majesty is amenable, I remember a chamber in the main part of the palace that's perfect for a council," Glinda said sweetly. "Certainly," Dorothy said distractedly. "Whatever you think is best." She flounced out the door, her red shoes still radiating that immense, otherworldly light, and after a moment the rest of us followed her, unanswered questions on the tips of our tongues. Glinda certainly knew her way around the palace. I wondered how, and where she'd come from. She'd vanished ages ago. When did she come back? And how? What on earth was going on? Glinda led us down a maze of hallways and green-tinted corridors I didn't recognize. I'd visited once or twice when Scarecrow was our noble leader, but I hadn't been to the palace in years, and I was soon helplessly lost. Like many buildings at Oz, it looked a lot bigger on the inside than it did on the outside, and the palace was already pretty big on the outside. Finally, Glinda led us to a large round chamber, painted a more subdued version of the palace's up-coitus dazzling green. An ornately carved round table dominated the room, surrounded by heavy wooden chairs that politely moved backward from the table as we entered, murmuring, "Please be seated." A bespectacled pixie bursted the scene in a puff of gray dust. "Welcome to the council chamber," she chirped. "Please allow me to see to all your council needs. Coffee, pens, paper, a chalkboard?" Glinda flicked it in the chest with one pink lacquered talon, sending the startled pixie into a backward somersault through the air. "To be left alone," she cooed sweetly. "You're dismissed." Obediently, the pixie vanished in another puff of smoke. We seated ourselves around the table, the chairs smoothly scooting inward for their own ventilation, but Dorothy and Glinda remained standing. Well, if you could call Glinda's unnerving habit of hovering just inches above the floor standing. None of us spoke for a moment. I stared at Dorothy. She was the most beautiful I've ever seen her, but the transformation in her was even more apparent than it had been at the ball. It wasn't that she was older. She wasn't, really, considering how much time had passed in Oz since she left us. She was at almost just a few years older than the fresh-faced girl who had journeyed with us to the Wizard's Palace, and won the heart in which I'd fallen in love with her. The difference was something else, something harder to pin down. It was something in the glitter of her eyes and the set of the shoulders. It was, I realized, power. Dorothy, the new Dorothy, was powerful. Glinda cleared her throat distinctly, and Dorothy glanced at her. Glinda made a tiny little gesture toward her dress, and Dorothy laughed. Of course, she said cheerfully. How could I forget? This is no way to keep a dress for meeting with my most treasured. My heart skipped. Confidants. She waved one hand at herself, and before our astonished eyes, her ball gown transformed itself into a more modest, but still becoming version of her old familiar gingham dress. This one was like a ball gown, sewn with subtle gold threads that glittered and caught the eye, and its bodice fitted her tiny waist closely, but her skirt fell to the middle of her calves, and a demure little white cape sailed over her flawless shoulders. Invisible hands brushed her disordered ringlets, neatly tying them up in little blue velvet ribbons. Her lips were a painted pale, flattering pink, and a sweep of pink blush appeared on each of her high, elegant cheekbones. Her blue eyes sparkled as, refreshed, she looked down at us, where we sat with our mouths open. Now, she continued, where was I? Oh, don't look so astonished. She laughed as we gaped at her. It's just silly little bit of magic. Nothing to worry about. What girl wouldn't use the opportunity to pretty herself up with a little magic if she could? But Dorothy, the Scarecrow began. Princess Dorothy, Glinda smoothly interjected, and the Scarecrow looked around, his face as startled as we all felt. Glinda was serious with this princess business, then. What on earth was going on? Princess Dorothy, the Scarecrow amended. It's just that, well, none of us ever realized you could use magic when we were all traveling through Oz. Dorothy's perfect eyebrows drew together on a tiny frown of displeasure. Darling Scarecrow, she said a trifle coolly, surely you're not implying there's something wrong with me having magic. Of course not, Dorothy, he replied hastily. It's just that, well, it was a very long time ago, so my memory could be fuzzy. But when you helped the Lion and the Tin Woodman and me on our journey through Oz, and most nobly won us our respectful gifts from the Wizard, there was no hint that you had any magic then. Did you have these powers all along? If you did, why did you need the Wizard to help you? Dorothy's eyes widened. Oh, you're saying that after everything I did for you, after everything I sacrificed to help you, setting aside my own needs, even though I had no idea whether I'd be able to go home myself, are you saying that I was selfish? But I thought you were all my friends, she whispered, and a single tear trickled down her perfect cheek. Unable to bear the sight of her distress, I leapt to my feet and then fell immediately to my knees before her, reaching for her hand. Dorothy, I pleaded, don't listen to him. Of course we're your friends. You know that. We love you, Dorothy. She gazed down at me, and I wondered if she understood what I was really saying. Not we love you, but I love you. Her expression softened, and some of the hurt left her face. Oh, Tin, she said gently, laying one soft hand against my cheek. I should have known you would be loyal to me, even if no one else was. My dear soldier, what would I have done without you the last time I was in Oz? Without your courage and your dedication? I was so thrilled at her words that I nearly missed that last subtle emphasis on dedication. But she was looking not at me, but at the Scarecrow. Her eyes narrowed. I could have strangled him. If only Dorothy and I had been alone, I could have told her everything. Told her that I wasn't just loyalty I felt, but love. I sat back in my chair, and I could have sworn my cheek burned where she touched me. The Lion yawned widely. I'm sort of hungry, he said to no one in particular. Dorothy and the Scarecrow were still staring at one another, but the Scarecrow looked away first. Of course, we don't think you're selfish, Dorothy, he said. We're all your friends. You're very dear friends, he added, with a sharp look at me. It's just a bit of surprise, all of this, that's all. We're so happy to see you that we aren't even thinking straight, and for you to come back with magic is an even more wonderful surprise. Dorothy widened her eyes again, this picture of childlike innocence. Very well, Scare, she said. I see your confusion. I should have known better than to doubt my beloved companions. As for the magic, well, I simply don't know how to tap into my potential when I first arrived in Oz. I was raised by simple people. She paused for a moment, and a single crystalline tear sprang into life at the corner of her eye. I almost leapt out of my chair to wipe it away. Simple people, she continued, her voice wavering a little, who don't know what I was capable of. They didn't understand I was so much more than just an ordinary girl from the prairie. They loved me, I know, they did, but they weren't courageous or clever enough to see what was right for me. Can you believe they honestly thought I belonged in Kansas? She shuddered daintily and then smiled. "But I have a new family now," she said. "A family who believes in me. Who knows how much I can do, and who will celebrate that instead of trying to hold me back." She turned to Glinda, who'd been silent for this whole exchange, and bowed her head just slightly. "Glinda, believe in me from the very beginning," she said. "And Glinda's going to show me how to use the power I've always had without knowing it. Everything I'm going to become, I owe her. And my own innate gifts and intelligence, of course," she added hastily. "I'm done underestimating myself." "But Dorothy," growled the lion, from where he was slouched in his chair, with one still blood-stained paw sprawled against the glossy tabletop. "What does that actually mean?" Dorothy smiled. "It means, my darlings, that the future of Oz is in this room." She paused dramatically, leaving time for the word darling to send dizzying passion cascading through me. "It means," she said finally, as Glinda hovered behind her, smiling in a visible cloud of strawberry-scented perfume, "that the future of Oz is me. Dorothy, the Princess of Oz."